Thomas is Head of Cataloging and Metadata at UCL. He taught classification and cataloging at UCL's Department of Information Studies in 2019, and he's no stranger to linked data for libraries. If you're ready, over to you, Thomas.
Okay, if I can make it share. Is that visible?
That's very, very visible. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for that. So my name is Thomas Meehan. I'm doing this talk live, which I'll no doubt heartily regret in about 10 minutes' time. I've tried to be restrained, and I've only included one gratuitous cat picture, which I do not apologise. There's also a model of a cat, which is smaller than Violet's, but I think it's still quite good. Small chance that an actual cat might appear at the moment, but I think he's asleep. I'm going to talk about a small project to reclassify a section of art collection, our book collection, to try and mitigate its bias against non-classical and Western art. We'll examine the reason why this was necessary, the technical steps taken to tackle the relatively small but still big numbers as simply and as quickly as possible, and the potential for similar work within UCL to address issues around decolonizing, liberating the collections and catalogue. I'll introduce the problem and the technical issues first by running through a quick description of UCL, where the classification fits, the classification scheme involved, and the specific schedules. My job mainly involved a team looking after getting print and increasingly electronic books and videos described in Mark 21 onto Alma and then into UCL's Explore service and other services such as the NBK. I worked with my colleague Andrew Watson, who works primarily on stores and rares material. I should say that most Garside classification, which I'm going to talk about, we have a variety of schemes, but most classification within the central UCL sites has always been undertaken by subject librarians, not by cataloguers, which is unusual. Hence the close involvement of Liz Laws, the art liaison librarian, in driving this project. UCL is a multidisciplinary university based in central London, and it's one of the three third oldest English universities in England, depending on who you ask. Normally, in fact, my office overlooks the British Museum rather than my garden. Its slogan is that it's London's global university. So as such, you might expect a great deal of cosmopolitan culture and diversity. When we were looking at setting up working groups to look at diversity and decolonizing curriculums, it apparently wasn't necessarily the case. Most subjects are UCL, some obvious exceptions being Christian theology, we are the Godless College of Gower Street, and music. Of course, though, librarianship was too important to omit, a sizable librarianship collection still. UCL's art department is known as the Slade School of Art, and it dates from 1871. I was in the north wing of UCL's main quad on Gower Street, and you can see a picture of that on the right-hand side. UCL uses the Garside classification scheme, which is almost unique. It's named after a chap called Kenneth Garside, who was deputy librarian at UCL in the 1950s. He also created a classification scheme at Leeds, which I'm never quite sure is how much it's still in use. And he was a librarian at Leeds before the Second World War. He then went on to work at King's College London, but I don't think he created a classification scheme there. It's strongly based on matching collections to departments and reading rooms. Hence you can see the word art at the beginning of the class mark. Other bits of the Garside scheme have the name of the collection in them as well, including librarianship and Latin American history, of which are a lot harder to fit on a spine label. These priorities mean, importantly, that it falls on the pragmatic side of classification rather than universal bibliography or a complete of knowledge. You can see hopefully a breakdown of the classification scheme, the basic outline. The section I'd like to talk about today is modern art, which is M. Just to give you an idea what a typical classification looks like in Garside, which often confuses students because they're used to something like Dewey. It's a whole thing. So it's this one is Art ME 11 MEE, and some other typical ones might be this one, which is the longest one I could find at short notice for Latin American history. And this one is, for example, where Maxwell's book on Ferber lives, librarianship L82 MAX. This is what a breakdown of the bits of the classification means. So art is the art collection. ME means modern art in Britain and Ireland. 11 means refines it further down to 19th century, and MEE is what you might loosely call a cutter. So it's just where the filing by or by title. This is the more detailed look of what modern art in Garside, which is subdivided by place, looks like. You can see modern art in Britain and Ireland at the top there, ME, which we've just seen, plus various other territories. So we've got France under MF, Austria and Switzerland under MG, and MI under Italy for Italy. And you can see that all European, except for the United States under U. And you'll also notice that the letters names of the countries, they're not in necessarily order. So it goes F for France, G, N for Netherlands, R for Russia, and so on. At the bottom for absolutely everything else, including bits of Europe, anything in South America or Asia, is Art MX, modern art in other countries, A to Z by country or continent. And there's a separate instruction on the end not to subdivide any further. So to give you an example, we have this classification, which is Art MX IND. So that means it's in the art collection, it's modern art in other countries. And IND could mean India. So we have one book here, which is Bauhaus in Calcutta. So that bit is, this is a real example. And it was filed under Art MX IND. This is another book, which is Indonesian I, Contemporary Indonesian Art, and that's in exactly the same location. So you can see the kind of basic problem where things are all filed in together in a kind of big bucket. In theory, there's some, I couldn't find any actual examples, but in theory, a book about China, Chinese art, would go under CHI, as would a book about Chilean art would go into CHI. Books about Iranian art would go in IRA, as would books about Iraqi art. Continents and culture, continents, cultures are all kind of mixed up as well. The bit I wanted to look at today in particular is to do with African art. So if we look at it, I pulled out all the sections dealing with African countries here and put them in order. So it interests you if you look at Cameroon, CAM, and the CAM doesn't necessarily mean Cameroon, but it's where Cameroonian art would be filed. Bear in mind that this will be interfiled with Brazil, would come before Cameroon, but after Africa. Canada would come after Cameroon, before Central African Republic, and Denmark would be filed between Congo and Egypt. Africa comes at the top, which looks quite logical, but that's only because of alphabetical order. Latin American art in general would be filed between Ghana and Nigeria. So we had a specific complaint which brought this to light from a postgraduate student looking at West African art and Nigeria in particular. And this is a section where she was looking. And you can see Nigeria will be filed between New Zealand and Norway, which is not arguably not as logical as it could be. And it's not very good for obviously serendipity if you're trying to look around similar kind of materials. So you want to look at other West African countries, you'd have to go looking quite hard and sort of think about what they might be and plan your attack that way. You can't kind of see similar books in a similar place. So there's two issues, and this is my Shearer's cat picture. There's a practical one, how to find material on Nigeria or related regions when they're scattered alphabetically. So it presents a problem for the user, especially as art is one of those subjects where browsing the shelves will be more important. And also a principle, how to address the obvious relegation of importance of non-Western art into a thoroughly unordered section right at the end of the classification. So Liz Laws, the art librarian, head of acquisitions, and myself, we met to discuss what we could do. Ideally, the whole art collection would be revised to take out all the bias and kind of rejig it and rebalance it. But obviously that's an awful lot. It's 36,000 items that we'd need looking at. But if we kept it small, it made it doable. So the solution was a limited reclassification of roughly 1,800 ArtMX books using an updated version of Garside's geographical table 2. So there's one geographical table which is found in various forms throughout the classification. And it's been revised piecemeal, and the original version I saw has, we could have a presentation on that alone because of what the way it's viewed the world, largely from the 1950s, including in London at the very start of the classification. So the idea is to revise ArtMX, just that section, and produce a mapping as far as we could from the old classification numbers to the new ones, produce an Excel spreadsheet of the old call numbers by doing the export of from Alma. So you can export Excel files from Alma and convert those old ones to the new ones using the mapping. Thirdly, you need to update the mark records themselves from Mark Edit, and then use that to update the holdings records on Alma. Plus, Liz was quite keen to take the opportunity to differentiate between works about an artist and a country's art in general, which was not made at all in the original. So Liz worked on working out the classification scheme, revising the outdated table 22. And this is the section dealing with West Africa, a small section of it. So we have 65.4 is now where Nigeria, art on Nigeria lives, and you can see separately put 0 for art theory in general and 1 for artists, work by those artists. And there's a similar pattern for Senegal, which is 65.5. On screen now is a spreadsheet of the mapping. So we had a part of the spreadsheet dealing with the mapping. And on the left, you can see where the countries, so NIG in row 48 now maps to 65.4. So once we had this mapping, we could start to work on these automatically using a spreadsheet rather than going through all 1,800 manually. And you can see also that things that would have filed together, like New for New Zealand, is now a completely different place, 75. Norway would be under 49, and it's sort of, so everything's going to end up in a completely different place. We wanted to put some more meaningful cutters in, because in the previous one there was no cutters by authors. There's nothing to distinguish the books within sections. So we used the spreadsheet and the data from Alma to derive a title cutter for each record based on taking the first 3 letters and then converting to uppercase. And then we did a separate cutter for the artist or the author. We went on the idea that the author or the artist, the main entry for these books, where appropriate, would be most likely to be the artist. So we kind of made that assumption. We did experiment with doing it with subjects as well, but I think that was quite, we decided to keep it simple. So this screen, it might not come out too well, this shows two examples, two rows in the spreadsheet, and you might be able to see where it's been squashed up, so I've hidden an enormous amount of columns to make this readable. So on the left, on the top row, you can see a book that has a title and an author, and you can see the old call number for Nigerian art, and you can see the cutter OGB for the author, and then the cutter for the title is EME. And because they're an author, or an artist in this case, that's the cutter that's been used in the final class mark. And the second example, which is a Norwegian one, there's no author, so there's been no author cutter derived from that one, and it uses the title class mark. So we use some Excel and some assumptions to try and make this as quick and deal with the big issues as much as we could. Labelling the books. Normally our spine labels are laser printed by us locally or produced as part of a shelf-ready contract. Neither option was really practical for the thousands of labels needed, so we employed a labelling company to produce these quickly at a low cost. And we employed a temporary library assistant who took about 10 hours a week over 6 weeks to label and move the entire stock. And it was in quite an awkward place up some stairs, and of course art books are heavy. The final stage, although labelling in fact took longer, was to get the class marks into the holdings record. So the first step was to create a dummy mark file from the Excel document with a system number and a call number. So the system number is from the mark export. So that's in the 001 field, hopefully you can see in red. And we use MarkEdit's delimited text translator to create a new mark file, which this is the entire mark record for one record. And you can see the 086 field has the new Garside number in it, ArtMX 65.410DU. We use the 086 field because it's for the government document classification number, which we're never going to use. And it's something which we knew Alma would recognise and could work with. So we use that to store our Garside number in it. And the 087 has the old class mark just for historical interest, or if we need to do some amendments later. So then I needed to do an export of mark records from Alma, a fresh export, because we, in case a lot have probably changed since we initially looked at these. We want to make sure they're as up to date as possible. So you can see the 001 field there, but there's no 086 or 087 in the record. Then we use MarkEdit's merge function to add the 086 and 087 to the mark records. So that just matches on the system number in the 001 and merges all the anything lacking from the master record in from the stub records we created. So you can see the 086 and 087 there with the data in them. And the most hair-raising bit for me easily, if I had any hair left, was for the overlaying the old records. So I imported all 1800 records in en masse, and Alma matched them on the 001 field. So this is an example you can see actually from Alma, a screenshot of it with the 086 and 087, and it was successful. I had to run a further job after that to actually make sure those went into the holdings records as well. So that's not too, this is all new to me for how to do these. I'd like to pretend that it was a totally neat and automated project, a kind of big project for lots of data, but it obviously wasn't. And there's various tidying up to do. So things like ArtMX AFR, covered a multitude of sins and probably could would deal with things that were regional or general and could do with some more work. There were missing items to deal with, things that had gone missing off the shelf, needed to be marked up as such, or things that have changed since we did the initial export. Some prominent artists were brought out more systematically. So Edvard Munch is obviously quite a significant character, and some of his, the system assigned some of his to the authors of works about him. So Liz went through and amended some of those so they're all under MUN for Munch, but at least they're a bit, they're not just under NOR anymore. They have their own class mark. So this is what it looked like in Explore, which is our Primo service. And you can see the final class mark sitting there nicely, and I've got a window there to show exactly what it looked like. So these are now all live. So the actual Alma bit, so it's for the planning, the actual Alma bit took and the technical changes took about a morning. So the labelling is actually the long thing, the thing that took longest. So it's not too long at all. So it's quite nice to be able to do all of these without having to sit down and do them all individually. So a couple of thoughts on this. Firstly, listening to readers is important. I don't want to overdo comparing this to the Illegal Aliens project, but it's kind of interesting that they both came about in a similar way. It was very good to complete a practical project of this nature. Again, think of Illegal Aliens, which I've known about since, or it's been most prominent about since kind of this time last year. It was, and this project, the RTMX project, we could do really quickly and get on with it, which I still haven't done with the Illegal Aliens material, much to my shame. But having a local scheme means that we can fix things quickly. We don't have to worry for standards to catch up or worry about the admin of keeping something which is not standard anymore. This also does mean we have no excuse not to fix things quickly. So other things that we do have to sort out means we probably have more of a duty to get on and get it done. Fifthly, this is necessarily imperfect. The Edvard Munch is a good example of how automating it doesn't necessarily make it correct. This is an excellent way of learning about technical manipulation of data. So we've had Alma only since the end of 2018, so it's been really good for learning about how that works and how we can use Alma, Excel and MarcEdit together to do kind of exciting things. And it's a good model for similar projects, including costings and timings. So next steps, and this is a slightly smaller cow picture, document everything. I documented as much as we went along, but I could neaten that up, and more documentation is better for new projects. We can copy the same kind of things, the same procedures. And Andrew Watson and I, for instance, have just imported about 1900 rare books that were only in a spreadsheet on the website, and they're now in Alma because we managed to make mark records of them and make them more available. Liberating collections work. We've got a working group looking at this, focused on all aspects of collections work, so collecting, classification, cataloguing, policy. And we're hoping we can do some similar small cleanup jobs on some dodgy areas of classification like anthropology, and we've got some areas of former Yugoslavia that need to be cleared up. We've also got works around problematic materials from Holocaust and old literature, handling things like scene art, ethical research, and the work of eugenesis, which UCL has a couple of strong collections on this, and how we mark this kind of work up. So it's good to have a very practical kind of thing actually having done as a kind of marker of what we could start working on in the future. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. Let me come back. And we're back. So we have time for some Q&A, and we have one question already, which is from Philip. He says, did you take the opportunity to do any record upgrading in MarcEdit, for example, for brief records, if any was needed?
No, we didn't. I think we tried to concentrate on getting this particular bit of it done, because it's quite complicated enough as it was. And I've tried as the years have gone by to try and sometimes you have to kind of put your hand over your eyes and say, I'm not going to look at every small detail and hope and get this bit of it done. I don't think the records were too bad, but a lot of them were quite old, so they probably would have, would have pushed the project sideways, I think, to actually keep looking at the individual records for these.
You could always improve on records as well, can't you?
Yes, you could do it later.
Almost endlessly.
I think with Alma and stuff as well, it's quite easy to look at these things and try and treat them differently, so we can actually look at, try and look at, dodgy record, incomplete records or bad quality records separately. We didn't look, which might be an idea to look at maybe if there's similar issues in the subject headings or the way they've been handled, where they've been handled a similar kind of way, dismissive way, if you like, which would be quite interesting to look at, but we didn't look at that, no.
Okay, we have another question from Sally. Sorry, there's 2 or 3 that have come in. 4, so I shall rush through these. Sally says, very interesting to learn about the methodology, even though I know nothing about art. At which point did you update the records with the new class numbers? Was it before, after, or during the physical labeling? And how did you manage with finding things and communications during the time of work in progress?
It was done during the summer, so it's done during last summer. So kind of we took it at a fairly quiet time, and I think there's labels put up saying there was we tried to do it fairly quietly. So I think there's labels put up in the that section of the library saying what was happening and suggested things might be moved around, especially while the person was working. I think it was closed off. It's quite an inaccessible area anyway.
Okay, that leads into
the opportunities to go ahead with. Sorry. Yeah, we took the opportunities to go ahead with the Alma side of things first, so it was all done, and knowing that if someone's really stuck, we did have the class marks in the record, so we could find where they would be if they didn't match up in one particular place.
Yeah. That leads on to the next question, which is from Victoria, and she says, have you seen or do you expect to see an increase in usage stats from this change?
I don't know, if I'm being honest. I'd have to talk to Liz again and see if there's been any particular usage. That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Okay. We have another question from Gemma. She says, hi, thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. I'm just interested in whether any discussion was given that grouping people by ethnicity is problematic to begin with, and what is the process for people with dual nationalities?
That's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of work, I think, about, and it sounds like a get out, but going back to the imperfections, I think, in it, there's a lot that it's still not happy about. And I think the Garside classification scheme, or that whole art scheme, could probably be rewritten along similar lines. And the whole rest of that section is also done, by country. We didn't actually consider that particular point as such, so no. No, that's an interesting point. So I won't say any more. I think that whole section is kind of obviously imperfect, and at least now we can handle people if they're counted as a European artist more than we could ever have done before, and we recognise that Norway is still now completely separated from the rest of Europe, which is not good. It still needs a thorough overhaul, in theory, and possibly more controversially, use a more established classification scheme.
Okay, gosh, we have a lot of questions. So Helen is asking, were holdings records updated as an import job or a run a job option in Alma?
It was there's an update items or holdings, I can't remember exactly what it's called. There's a job that updates holdings based, you can update, and it will take the classification from the appropriate field in the mark record itself. So you can do it quite easily using LC, for instance, because it recognises the field there. But we mapped the call number type in holdings 8 to the 086 field. So I could just run that job and it all just ran through that way. It wasn't done as an import job anyway, it's separate.
Okay. Nicola is asking, sorry if I missed this, but how many books in this section were reclassified? And are there plans to tackle any other section?
There are 1,800, so 1,800 books in that section. And there are plans to look at other sections. I mentioned Yugoslavian sections, so where we have a strong East European collection, which is classified completely differently, but it's all done by region. And at the moment, when it was reclassified, when Yugoslavia broke up and the independent states, but they've still got a Yugoslavian umbrella to them. So all the separate states have their own class mark, but they're still under an umbrella. So we're hoping it would be good to use a similar approach would work for those. So we could probably do an automatic job in it, but that's quite a lot bigger as well. So it's a case of labeling costs and timings. We've also going to look at things like anthropology, where a lot of art material has been put. Just because it's indigenous art, it's ended up in anthropology rather than art. So there's lots of little things like that to sort out, which hopefully we can use a similar approach for.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, with the countries, because, as you say, Yugoslavia previously, so when you have books that are written about Yugoslavia,
Yeah.
where do they go now?
Well, there's I think there should be a general pot for Yugoslavian stuff as well. Obviously, a bigger problem going back years for the Soviet Union, and we've only just sorted out a lot of former states like kind of Georgia and things, which were previously under the Soviet Union. So we sorted a lot of those out, but one of the catalogues did a lot of that manually because the numbers weren't too large.
Cool. So we have two more questions. One from Michelle, who's saying, when using Excel to assign the 3-letter author or title cutter, was the cutter assigned by a human, or did you automate that somehow?
It's a mixture at the end, but it's largely automated. So I used that formula, which took the cell which had the title data in, and it read the first 3 letters, and then just moved them to uppercase. And then there's a separate formula which did the same thing for the author or artist. And a lot of those hidden columns, there's lots of formulas in them kind of working. And there's one that said that if there's no author cutter, then use the title cutter. So you can use some like simple logic spread out in lots of different columns to kind of work it all out. If anyone's interested in that, I'm quite happy to, if anyone gets in contact, I'm quite happy to share any of this.
I get the feeling that
it still works.
I get the feeling that's the feeling I'm getting from all the comments. I guess with a lot of these projects for people kind of on the ground, if you haven't done it before, you really do need somebody to say, well, I did it this way. So yes, it'll be an interesting one to see how we can help each other on these kinds of matters. So I have the last question, which is from Pam. She says, thank you so much for sharing this important work. What feedback have you received from users?
It's interesting feedback because, I mean, it was kind of one complaint that kind of brought this out in the first place. And I'd have to talk to Liz about if it's had any particular feedback about this, from, people don't tend to tell you when things are going well. So I'm not quite sure if we had any particular feedback about it, but I can try and look into that one.
Fair enough. Okay, and it's 10:30. So Thomas, I just want to say thank you very, very much. And thank you also for hopefully staying on for the end of the session. So when we go to breakout rooms, if people do have questions they want to grill you with, you'll be available. So we're going for a short break. Those who weren't with us yesterday, we have a sort of 10-minute break in between the speakers. So we'll see you again.